Today on Locked On Red Wings, we look back at our preseason projections with the Grindline podcast.
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. I'm your host, Brian Fisher. Scotty is with us this episode, but recording this intro solo, as you guys will find out very shortly. I went through a plethora of technical issues to get you guys this episode out, but we are there. Today's episode will be brought to you by Monopoly Go. Game off. We got to talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes, unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go, now free on the Google Play and the App Store. Yeah, so it's going to be pretty simple. Back in August of 2023, the Grindline, Scotty and I went through an episode where we just predicted things we thought were going to happen in the 23-24 season, and you're going to find out that we were wrong on some of it and right on others. So without further ado, let's get right to it.
What's up, and welcome to another episode of the Grindline podcast. You're listening to episode 273. I am Greg. I am here tonight with two very special guests, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley from the Locked On Red Wings podcast. How you guys doing tonight?
Doing good, Greg. Thanks for having us back on for our third crossover, I think it is now. I know in this one we're going to be revisiting some of our takes from before the season started, and I'm very embarrassed about one of them.
Don't be embarrassed.
I'll tell you what, man. I took a peek, and I feel really vindicated on a couple, and really not good about a couple other ones. But yeah, I'm glad to be back. We always have a good time.
Listen, I was surprised we hit on a lot of the ones that we did, because there were some that were pretty out there. So what we're going to do tonight is before the season started back in preseason, episode 237 for us, we played a game of over-unders. So what we each did was we brought two over-unders to the table. We kind of made our predictions on whether we would go over the prediction or over the line or under the line, and then revisiting it now at the end of the season. And it was, I'm going to say, it was a lot better than I thought it was going to be. I think we can all agree the Red Wings had a season better than we had probably expected. Some other teams in the conference made it not as easy as we thought they were going to. And I think most of us came out on top on these. So do we want to go in order? Do we want to just take them as they come, discuss them, and then interject in the middle a little bit of back and forth? Oh, all right. So before anyone says anything, and for those of you watching on YouTube, Brian looks a little different. Brian has computer issues that are pretty large now, considering I think it's dead, like completely.
I mean, the PC it's doing the thing that it did all last week, where it just decided, hey, I'm going to stop sending video and USB feed to your monitors and keyboard. So, and then I have a backup laptop, which also has decided it's not going to work. So what my setup is now is the camera is my iPhone. I have my microphone hooked up via here. I can even show you guys. It's a splitter.
So unnecessary. This whole thing.
One for the microphone and one for the headphone. So I'm using my professional microphone on my iPhone, which I think is pretty impressive ingenuity.
Yeah, I didn't know you could do that.
I didn't know I could do it either. I took a shot in the dark. But yeah, you're gonna get motion sickness watching me all day as I just move this camera around. I might just in a rage go buy a $5,000 computer tomorrow. I don't know how much they cost anymore. I honestly don't know.
You haven't bought one in 10 years.
I haven't bought one in 10 years.
What we're going to do tonight is we're going to go through this list. So I'm going to start at the top. The first over-under that we covered was Brian's. His over-under was Husso over and under a 908 save percentage. Ville Husso ended with an 892 and a bunch of injuries. But the team, I think, so Scotty said a hair under at 905-ish. Ryan was under. I was over. Brian was over. He did finish under, but I think the silver lining here, and you guys talked a little bit about goaltending on like 2 episodes ago when I was listening about Ville Husso. They went from 25th in the league to 18th in team save percentage. And I think that's the big takeaway there, is that even though Husso was out for a lot, and we thought that Alex Lyon was going to go to Grand Rapids and just be the starter, that he came in while being overplayed, just like killed it. Like fantastic, Alex Lyon, except for when he was feeling it and had the down month. But to go from 25th to 18th without who was expected to be your starter, super impressive stuff.
No, absolutely. Wow, that's really impressive. Look at him go, man.
It's hanging on the monitor.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I agree. And as far as Husso specifically, it's a goaltending is such an interesting situation going forward. And I know we're focusing on this past year, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but like the goaltending room, I guess I'll call it, just going ahead is just such a fascinating conversation. It's because like we got 2 or 3 crazy good months from Husso 2 seasons ago now, and then this past season we got below 900 save percentage and then injury for most of the year on top of that. And there's just I think it's a really, really interesting and kind of fascinating conversation on what is going to happen in net going forward. But I mean, as far as Husso specifically goes, obviously not the year that I don't think anyone wanted, himself included. And unfortunately, a lot of that has to do with not being able to stay on the ice.
Yeah. And so what was that number again? Remind me, 908?
8.
9. Yeah. Yep. 908
Yikes.
You had. He ended with an 892.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably like the biggest whiff of all the ones we're going to go through today. I mean, obviously, a huge part of that has to do with the fact that he got hurt, and that's already been mentioned. I do stand by, if he had been healthy, I think he would have been closer to 900. He didn't have a strong start, then he got hurt, never really had the opportunity to bounce back because of that. But it sucks. I still think, this team, this roster, the coaching staff still believes that he can be the guy, at least in part, with Alex Lyon. But I don't. Definitely, faith his last 2 seasons have been a little bit more shaken because of that.
Doesn't that worry you? Doesn't
one.
that worry you? Like going into saying like, well, Husso, I think it was the sequence of events that worries me. He gets injured, he comes back, plays a game, gets injured again, comes back, and then in like warm-ups gets injured and is out again. And it's hard because it was giving me shades of remember Jonas Gustafsson?
Oh yeah.
It was shades of that, where he couldn't stay healthy and it was just back-to-back injuries. Now, granted, this is the first time, I mean, Husso was hurt a little bit last season, but this is the first time where it's been pretty consistent injuries for him. And with Gustafsson, it was where I ended up affectionately calling him Jonas Glastafsson, because it felt like he would just break it any second.
You say affectionately, and I don't know if that's true.
I mean, he was only here for so long, so I can say affectionately. But I feel like going into next season with Husso, I think you still, assuming Reimer's out, you still have to, I think, make another goalie move, because we don't, I mean, I'm going to speak for the collective we and say Kosa's not ready, even though he's showed up in Grand Rapids for a big stretch of the season. He's not ready. So even if you think you can go into next season with Husso as your starter, I think you still have to make a really solid move at goal.
This is like, you are preaching to the choir. This is like one of my biggest points of the last like first 2 or 3 weeks of the offseason has been that exactly. Like, this is a goaltending situation that I don't think there is any way you can justify just going into next year without bringing in outside goaltender help to some capacity, whether that's, bringing in a true like 1A and breaking the bank on someone, or if it's just, a 1B or someone, you going with 3 goalies next year, even like you did this year. Like, you have to bring in somebody else to lighten the load, honestly, more than anything else, because I don't think that the 2 goalies you have like long-term proven track records of being able to do that really over any extended period of time.
Yeah, I mean, now that I'm sorry, Greg, now that I'm finished messing with things and I'm focused in on what we're talking about, I agree with Scotty there that it's hard to look at the goaltending tandem that they have and have any for sure confidence in what's going on. The big thing for me, though, is like you have 2 goalies that are under contract for 1 more year. And obviously, yes, trades happen. You can move a goalie. But with Sebastian Kosa, And I agree with you, Greg, that he's not close. He's not close enough to be the starter next season. I do expect him personally, and we can do this in August when we do next season's predictions. I do think he'll get spot starts at some point during the season. But I honestly would not be shocked if this is your tandem running it back for next season. Obviously, you can't predict injuries. You have players who go through the peaks and the valleys with injury. Obviously, right now, Husso is in one of those valleys. But you see guys like Steven Stamkos, for example, different positions. I understand that, but a guy who historically was always considered, made of glass, always had different things pop up. Last 2 seasons, he's been super healthy. So there's nothing to say just because Husso's been battling through injury this season doesn't mean he'll be battling through injury again next season. Alex Lyon proves that in short spurts, he can be the guy. And if you have Ville Husso, who I still have faith that if healthy, he can be a guy to split that workload, then you don't have to run Alex Lyon into the ground. And I'm not trying to make an argument here that they should be your tandem next year, because I agree with both you guys that I would love to see an upgrade. I just don't know how feasible getting an upgrade is because of the makeup of this roster right now. I mean, you could bring in a third goalie. Absolutely. You did that with James Reimer this year. And I haven't looked at the goalie market yet to see who's going to be available. But with both of these guys under contract for at least one more year, I wouldn't be shocked if they just kind of say, Husso's going to bounce back. Lyon proved to you that he can at least in part carry the workload. Let's see if they can make full 82 together.
Yeah, I think it's that tightrope, and we had talked about it previously. It's that tightrope that you have to walk, because that's the other part of having Kosa, into a lesser extent Trey Augustine in the system, is that even if you trade for a goalie, you're signing one, they're going to want term. You're not going to do that. You're going to have to trade for one. And you're going to have to trade for one that doesn't have a lot of term left on their contract. You're going to have to trade for someone that's got a year left. So maybe you go try and get someone, I think like Ullmark might have a year left. You might have to go trade for a Markstrom, and he's got a year left. So maybe you can, Alex Lyon showed he can be a starter for a decent amount of time. And if you've got a solid backup, maybe you can trade a Lyon and some pieces to get a Markstrom who's got a year, gives Kosa some time. Kosa gets spot starts when there's injury. Markstrom and Husso 1A, 1B. And I mean, this is just spitballing stuff, but I think we all agree that something has to happen. We think something has to happen, but there's a strong chance that nothing happens.
Yeah, I'll freak out if nothing happens. I'm going to be honest. Like, this is like, seriously, this is like one of my, like, really digging my heels in. Like, I think it is absolutely absurd if they just go into next year with these two and that nothing changes. I think that, not even from the injury perspective, I don't even really care about that. Like, those are hard to predict, like, whatever, just purely performance. I think it is a wild take to just look at what's happened in net the last 2 years of Red Wings hockey and be like, oh yeah, let's just try this again. I think that's a really, really wild take.
I think that they'll sign a third goalie. Absolutely. I just don't think that they're going to, I don't know. And I don't think that they'll make a huge splash at that position. I
agree. I don't think they're going to break the bank on it. I just like you have to do something.
Yeah, and they will do something. They'll bring in a third goalie, and hopefully it'll be an upgrade over James Reimer. But I mean, I wouldn't expect something huge. They've proved this year that carrying 3 goalies, and a couple teams across the league have proved this year that carrying 3 goalies is just wise. But I don't think that they're going to go out there and, they might give them, considering that both these guys only have 1 year left, they could give a multi-year contract to one guy that they think could be like the 1B, with the anticipation that Sebastian Kosa works out. And, the second game against Rockford, he didn't look particularly good, but the first game he looked good, and all throughout the entire season, he looked good in Grand Rapids. So he's getting closer. But I just don't think it'd be a huge splash if they make a splash at all, which I just do expect them to bring in a third goalie. I just wouldn't expect it to be some game changer.
So here's your options, and we'll tie up the goalie conversation with this. Your options going in, these are the top level options. Matt Murray, so no. Ilya Samsonov, and I don't think Toronto's going to bring him back because of what he's done in the playoffs. I think Sammy will go to free agency. Chris Drieger, Swayman will be a free agent, but Boston's going to lock him up. Capo Kakkonen, Cam Talbot, Kevin Lankinen, Pavel Francouz, Eric Comrie, Casey DeSmith. I believe Pavel Francouz is retiring.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. Casey DeSmith is another option, I think. Vancouver has run DeSmith. They could re-sign him, but if you're looking for a guy that can start some games, and has been okay. Casey DeSmith's another option too. So I agree they'll probably carry 3, and Yzerman seems to think that a lot of teams going forward will carry 3 simply because of injury issues and overusage issues, which is probably a smart idea.
I agree. Got to interrupt you guys real quick so I can talk to you about today's sponsor, FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and even more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
So the next over-under that we're going to go to was Scotty's. He had over-under ranked 16th in power play and penalty kill. The Red Wings finished in 9th with a 23.8% on the power play and 14th with a 79.58, up from 17th and 18th. Ryan had the over. We all had the over on both, which was great, and we were all correct. And I think we didn't expect it to be that much over. And the Red Wings power play, it did hit a slump partway through the season where we're like, man, do we have to do something about Alex Tanguay and like get him out of the room? And then they flipped the switch back. I think one of the best takeaways from this season was special teams. I think you can take it, if you look at it as a whole, to the sum of the season, special teams was fantastic. And if they can run that same system back for both power play and penalty kill, probably bump the penalty kill up a little bit. But the power play finished super strong. And it was really good to watch them work it because they got those high offensive players and they were able to use them to their strengths.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the power play, this is one of the takes I'm actually proud of. The Husso one was one that I was like, ugh, but the power play one, I remember Scotty and I were talking over at Locked On Red Wings, and we had the conversation that, I mean, top 15 power play should have been the expectation, and top 10, like we even said to each other, top 10 is somewhere they could do if they have a really good season. And I know the power play down the stretch, I think the last few games it came back, but down the stretch overall, it had slumped a little bit. But regardless, they finished 9th. So I was like patting myself on the back when you sent these show notes over. And I was like, oh, I said over 10 top 15 and they picked top 10. I was pretty proud of myself. Yeah, the Tanguay conversation is an interesting one because there definitely has been that conversation at times throughout his tenure with the Detroit Red Wings about replacing him. Obviously, with a new regime, I was willing to give it time just because, again, new regime, it takes time for things to be put into place. But the special teams overall was something that I thought was an area that really worked out overall across the season. The penalty kill too at times slumped. And then it went through a tremendous stretch in January and February where they didn't allow like a single goal in like 20 games, or it was like 1 or 2 goals in like 20 games. So yeah, I mean, it's not surprising considering all the offensive pieces they brought in. I think the penalty kill improving is the one that should really be like the benchmark. Like this was a good improvement year because with all those assets they gained on the offense, like you just said, Greg, like that's anticipated that you would take that jump in scoring in the power play. Something they really needed to do in last offseason was address their goal scoring, and they did. But it was the defensive side of the puck, which at 5-on-5 didn't get a whole heck of a lot better, which we'll talk about later, I'm sure. But the penalty kill did improve to where we wanted it to, and that is in no small part due to guys like Moritz Seider taking a huge step forward in the role that they've acquired, and some of the guys you brought in as well. Like the fact that you can have a guy like Christian Fischer come into the organization who is known to be a PK specialist, and he's your 6th most used penalty killer on forward core, means that you have a lot of options. So I overall, like I was really pleased with how the special teams worked. Not a lot at the end of the season we were really pleased about because they missed the playoffs, but that was one thing that you look back and you're like, yeah, that took a definite step forward.
Yeah, and I think naturally now, like you look even further ahead, and I think, we could be having a conversation in August about like, is it possible for both of these units to be in the top 10, next year? I think that's something, again, like you want to continue seeing that progression going forward. And yeah, I think if I remember right, Brian was right where we were all pretty lockstep. We were all pretty lockstep on like the power play going, and the penalty kill was more of the conversation. And yeah, seeing the kill do that in especially what was that one? Was that like January, February? I guess the whole team was hot then, but they had that one like 6 or 8 week stretch where the penalty kill was like legitimately one of the best kills in the NHL. So that certainly helped that as well. And you know, they went through their ruts just like the rest of the team in March there. But yeah, I think, you know, getting that, and we'll probably regurgitate this comment through a lot, you know, just getting the consistency throughout the course of the season, I think is probably the next step in both of these things, rather than you're on fire for a month and then you're absolutely ice cold for a month kind of thing. And that's, again, that's not just that's not just special teams though. That's kind of a whole team thing. So yeah, I think seeing these steps forward is great though. And yeah, clearly I didn't do a very good job on the over under if we all did over and we were all right. I must have just picked a bad mark there, but
No, I think that goes back to the consistency thing. I think is going to be a big message, because if you can consistently do, and even if you brought your high down just a bit, but your low played consistently in like the middle, you brought it up. They're a playoff team. Absolutely. They would have absolutely made it, even though they should have made it in above the caps. They absolutely would have made it in the playoffs this season if they had just won one of those games in that 7-game losing streak, and they would have been in. So I think that's the thing, is just consistency next season is going to be probably the biggest talking point all throughout the offseason, all throughout training camp. And it should be that with Newsy too. Newsy should just be preaching consistently, constantly to this guy.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Agreed.
So to follow on route with this, Ryan's over-under was a power play percentage of 23%. I took the under. I said 21.9 to 22. Brian took the under between 10th and 15th in the league. Scotty and Ryan both took the over. They won. The power play increased from 21.1% to 23.8%. That actually, let's see, I have it up here. I think that put the Red Wings only below the Lightning, the Hurricanes, Rangers, Oilers, Avs, Stars, Leafs, and Panthers. So like I said, they came in 9th, but if you talk about all those teams, what do they all have in common?
They're in the
playoffs. Right?
Also
even teams below them. Vancouver finished with a worse power play. LA finished with worse. Boston finished with worse. Nashville finished with worse. Washington finished with worse. If we can sustain that, and we can sustain goal scoring, and we can just make the defense like mediocre, I think they're a playoff team, because the defense for stretches like could be described as bad, but that might be nice. And I think a lot of it, I mean, we've talked about it, a lot of it has to do with Mo Seider's deployment. You could probably get a little bit more out of him if you didn't overtax him there. And now we've got Edvinsson up, and that should help for a whole season, because he made Jeff Petrie look like an actual hockey player. And if you could just do that and keep your power play at the 23.8%, and even if it dips a little bit, even if it dips to a 22, you're still ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it's nice. The idea of having a top 10 power play penalty kill is nice, but honestly, if you're this is where the team struggled, right? Is 5-on-5 goal scoring. They really struggled at generating puck possession and generating shots at 5-on-5 throughout the season. So if you can make that better and improve your defensive side of the puck, which is something that, and we'll talk about that later, like, you barely got better at goals against by the end of the season, just barely, despite all the changes made along the blue line. And defense is a team game. It's not just the defense, something that Scotty and I preach time and time again on our own podcast about the defensive responsibility of the forwards. But really, is if you can just float in the top 15, not even the top 10, because I feel like that's selfish. And which is probably why when we did this in August, I was conservative on here, at least with my expectations. And my expectations were always top 15, but I always said it'd be nice. Like, there is a possibility that they could be top 10. But if they can stay top 15 next season and improve their goal scoring at 5-on-5, with maybe an addition in free agency, as well as get better at defense at 5-on-5, they'll make the playoffs. Because that's the biggest thing that they struggled with all season long, was their play at 5-on-5. Their special teams weren't the problem. Yeah, they went cold at times, but whose power play and penalty kill doesn't? So, I mean, the one thing that they did most consistently was special teams for the most part. It's the 5-on-5 play that, even when they were playing so well in January and February, you looked at the numbers. it was unsustainable. They were getting shelled most of those games and then just scoring wild goals off the rush. Like it comes down to being a team that's better at possessing the puck at 5-on-5. You do that, you'll make the playoffs. It's what it boils down to.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think on the notes here, one of the things that really jumps out is like Ghost with 27 power play assists, obviously, and he's now a free agent. And I don't know, Brian and I had a conversation about it. I would imagine he's not back, but it's
I would agree.
right, and it's an interesting conversation in regards to the power play when you look at the blue line specifically. Like, obviously that just means Sider is naturally probably going to get just more opportunities there, but like the blue line as a whole is so kind of weird. Like this summer, there's a lot of moves that could happen but aren't necessarily. Like it's a weird kind of dynamic. And I think on the power play specifically, you're losing a lot of assists, whether they're secondary power play assists or not. You're losing points there on the blue line. And I think that that's going to be a hot topic is, the system that Newsy wants to be defensive so bad. And yet this organization is full of guys that are good offensively and don't play defense. And like, it's so wild to me how like the system wants to be something so bad. And then you have Ghost and Sprong and Berger and like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you have like so many I mean, Kane, right? Like DeBrincat was a lot better defensively this year, but still like historically, like it's just littered with guys that are kind of all offense, no defense. So I think, you're going to want to maintain now that that's somewhat the standard, dare I say, on power play. Like you're going to want to maintain that like top 10 caliber, but you also are going to have to Brian's point, like kind of get the revolving door out and bring in some talent that can play defensively as well. And that's just a fine line to really walk.
Yeah, Brian, to your point about not winning at 5-on-5 hockey, you're getting extremely lucky. The Red Wings won 30 games where their Corsi for percentage at even strength was below 50%, which is an absolutely like staggering stat because Corsi, for people that don't follow advanced stats, Corsi for is like basically a possession percentage. When you above 50, you've controlled the puck more than 50% of the game. Yeah. They won games where they had, I don't know, let's see, a 35%, a 35.9, a 37.5, a 38.7. And those are games that you normally don't win because you don't have the puck. But then you've got guys that fly down like Daniel Sprong and put one right in the back of the net and you end up winning.
Well, what's funny about that too is like they're not even a good rush team either. Like that's the crazy part. Like you even among teams that run and gun, right? Like just go up the ice, get a grade A opportunity, and then they're cut right back down. Like they're not even in the top rankings of that. And the Corsi for percentage, like there is an argument to be made because a Corsi for and a Corsi against is a shot attempt for and a shot attempt against. It's literally all it is. Like it's the easiest of all advanced stats to understand. It's not even a shot on net. It's just, did they try to shoot the puck? Okay, yeah, that's a Corsi for. Did they try to shoot a puck against you? Okay, that's a Corsi against. Like it's such a simple stat, and there is an argument to be had about quality over quantity, and that's something I think that Derek Lalonde also wants for this hockey team, but also, and you can watch it too. Like you're watching these hockey games, how many times did they pass up on an opportunity to shoot the puck to try to make the perfect backdoor pass for a no miss goal? Just absolutely, like they did it all the time. In fact, that was something Scotty and I ripped into Lucas Raymond for early in the season because
that's what I was just going to say.
Everything right. And then the very famous quote from this season in overtime where Mickey Redmond says, "Shoot the puck, Lucas." Like it felt like that was the moment where something clicked with Lucas. And he's like, "Oh yeah, if I shoot the puck, I could score." It's just this team analytically, Corsi, Fenwick, expected goals, whatever metric you want to use is like bottom 5 and 5-on-5. And that you can't win a Stanley Cup like that. You have to be a good 5-on-5 hockey team to win a Stanley Cup. And the Red Wings still are not that good team. Feels like we've gotten off track.
PDO is another fun one that I like to look at, which is basically the luck percentage, how lucky the team was during a game. It's their shooting percentage plus their save percentage. And they had a game against the Calgary Flames in October where their PDO was 120. And a lot of the games this season, not a lot of them, but there were several that were over 110, but made the Red Wings look really good where they weren't. And that would just kind of help their case along. So they had some luck this season.
Got to interrupt you guys one last time to speak to you about Monopoly Go. Monopoly Go is the classic twist on the classic game of Monopoly, where you can team up with friends for time tournaments, work together to build up each other's boards, and the more you win, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the board with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique minigames like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win, or even wrench frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on.
My over-under was over-under 3 rookie appearances. Now as a preface, and I'll preface this was before they signed Patrick Kane midway through the season. This was before they traded for Jeff Petrie. So there was 2 prefaces right there. There was, and my disclaimer was that Edvinsson did not count because he had played multiple games already, but Casper would count because he had only played 1 NHL game. The answer was 0. Brian had the under 3. So Brian, I guess you won because it was under 3. You thought Ed would start in November and said Casper would get games and that we would see Wallinder or Johansson. I loved your sleeper of Cross Hannes. That didn't happen.
None of that happened.
Scotty took the under, thought 3 was the perfect number. Said Casper would get a game, was very confident Johansson would get a legitimate stint in the NHL. And then in my notes, I put thanks Jeff Petrie in parentheses. Ryan was under. He went with 2. Johansson on defense with a dark horse of Carter Mazur. I was over. I had said Casper, Mazur, Wallinder, and Johansson. I will say that I think, I'll still say that I think if Carter Mazur was healthy at the beginning of the season, I think there would have been a legitimate shot for him to make the team. Only because his development does not depend on playing a top 6 role.
Yeah.
The kind of player that he is, I think you could play him on the 3rd line and he would still have very solid development. And I think he would have helped bring grit to the team, bring toughness to the team, a little bit of that edge that pisses off other people and gets them off their game. And maybe you win a game against the Arizona Coyotes, or maybe you win a game against the Washington Capitals. And it was just the injury really kind of threw him off. And I think it made it clear that he was going to spend the year in Grand Rapids, because Yzerman said that all the other guys under no circumstances were going to come up. He said he'd rather them play 20 minutes a night in Grand Rapids than come to Detroit, play 4 minutes for 2 games and get sent back down. It's not fair to them. It doesn't make them happy to do that. And I mean, we were all wrong, but I think that was also kind of hamstrung a little bit by the Jeff Petrie trade, by the Patrick Kane signing, where more things could have happened. There ended up being no space.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think
Go ahead, Scotty.
The Ford that you have there, Greg, I think is honestly a really solid 4 for this fall, though. You know, like you look and you know, kick the can down the road, I guess. But like I think that's you know, when we revisit this in August, if you have a similar question, I feel like that's that's a really solid 4 there.
But at
also,
that point,
like,
we all bet 0, and then we'll see 4.
Right. There you go. Yeah, we'll all take 0. I do think also that the blue line was surprisingly healthy this year as well, which like that would have been an opportunity to, and like obviously at the end of the year you had you had some injuries and whatnot, like Wallman and whatnot, but like as a whole, there wasn't anything that was like completely, oh my goodness, we're down 2 or 3 defensemen at the same time. Like that never really came up. And I think that would have been the situation for some of those defensemen to maybe come up earlier, and that just never happened. So, like you obviously want the team to stay healthy, and relatively speaking, especially compared to years past, really forward core included, they were relatively that this year.
Yeah, I mean, it sucks that none of those guys we really saw. I mean, Edvinsson, it was just a logjam on defense, not necessarily Petrie's fault because he plays right side, if with him at least. But the logjam on the left side just prevented Edvinsson from getting the call up when he should have. And we talked about it on our podcast, right? Like, you can't displace Sherratt, you can't displace Wallman because they are fixtures on your defense. And you re-signed good Lord, Mata. You re-signed Mata last season, which at the time I was like, he's having a good year, so I get it. But even then, we were like looking to the future, like, this is going to kind of block guys you would expect to make the roster. And you saw, like, it did. It took an injury to Jake Wallman for Edvinsson to get the opportunity at the NHL level and then cement himself in that position, which is a real shame because you look at how good, and he made a couple rookie mistakes. He did. And that was the big talking point when the team was in a playoff spot and hunting for a playoff spot. Do you really want to bring up a rookie now to make mistakes when you're in a playoff hunt? It's like, yes, because we were having you're having veterans make rookie mistakes. And so, like, yeah, he made a couple of dumb mistakes. I know one in particular, I think it was against Montreal in one of those two last games where he coughed it up right in front of the net and ended up in a goal against, or he made a bad pinch and he got beat on the outside. But outside of those two individual moments, like, I struggle to find examples of Edvinsson hurting this team rather than helping it. In fact, he got more and more comfortable every single game. And it's like, you think about, okay, you didn't expect him to be healthy because he had the offseason surgery. So you made sure your blue line was set regardless. But by December, he looks good enough to play in the NHL. And you just think of how much he may have added to this blue line. And you saw he immediately was getting penalty kill time, immediately getting top 4 minutes. He made Petrie look better. Now, granted, part of that is because as soon as Edvinsson and Petrie joined together, they got easier deployments than when Sherratt and Petrie were together. You could see it on the chart after every single game. Petrie moved down a little bit because they were getting slightly easier deployments because of the fact that he was a rookie. But, like, they looked so much better together than Sherratt and Petrie ever did. And then Sherratt and Seider looked so much better than they did last season. And I would even go out on a limb and say that I thought they were better as a pair than Wallman and Seider were during the season as well. So it's like that logjam really frustrated me. I understand the rest of the guys, like Albert Johansson's a left-hand D. He can play right side. So you could make the argument that the acquisition of Petrie and the acquisition of Justin Holl blocked him from making the NHL level. But I can understand the argument for having him sit another year. Casper had a slow start in Grand Rapids, so I understand why they sent him down there at his age. It's just really the Edvinsson one that really just rubbed me the wrong way for the bulk majority of the season. We had Max Boltman on, right, during one point in the season, right, Scotty? We talked to him, and we were like, Yzerman always says, if a player is ready, he will be on the team. Is that the case here? Is Edvinsson not ready? And Boltman looked us in the eyes and straight up said, no, he's blocked, which is something we were told wasn't going to happen. It's just really frustrating.
Yeah, we had Edvinsson, I think, ready in January. I think January you could have brought him in probably around the first of the year, and he would look the same as he looked when you brought him in at the end of the season. And to speak on health of the defensemen, Moritz Seider played 82, Shane Gostisbehere played 81, Ben Sherratt played 77, you had Jeff Petrie play 73, Olli Mata plays 72, Jake Wallman plays 63. And for Sherratt and Seider looking as good as they did, I will fully put that on. Ben Sherratt turned his year around. Ben Sherratt became more of a menace like he normally is. And he plays a defensive style game. He has a little offense to him. They got OT Benny or whatever dumb name he gave himself. But he plays a defensive style, which kind of, I think, frees up Mo a little bit more to go around the ice, to make better plays, to not feel like he has to cover for his partner, which Jake Wallman is an offensive defenseman. We all know it. Is he terrible defensively? No, but Ben Sherratt is better defensively than Jake Wallman. So putting him with Seider really lets them lock down that top pair now that Sherratt is back to himself, which he wasn't last season for obvious reasons. And we actually have one that kind of tripped, I think, a lot of us up. Not a lot of us. I called the over. Brian called the over. Over under goals for 261 for the season. Last season, we finished 24th. The 2022-23 season finished 24th with 237 goals. This season, we finished 9th with 275 goals. Scotty took the under, said it was a big jump to go from bottom 7 to top half. Ryan took the under, said about 250. I took the over. I will pat myself on the back for calling a Raymond 30-goal season.
Nice.
Though I did miss on DeBrincat's 30 goals. I said easy 265 to 270. Brian was over. You wouldn't commit to Raymond at 30 goals. So for that, I call you a coward. But you said 25
Agreed.
more goals
Completely
wasn't too much
agree.
to ask. For the
First of
whole
all,
team.
hold on. Scotty trying to call me out right here. He got this one wrong.
All I said was I agree you're a coward. That's literally all I said.
But you got the under. Like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, I stood 10 toes down and got it wrong and looked you in the eye. You're a coward about it. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying is you're a coward. That's literally it. No, but I do think this is wild because like
move on.
If you
That
I'm
was a
gonna move
great
on.
transition, Scotty. Keep
The
going.
craziest thing to me about this is not only just like the depth scoring that we got that I don't think anyone really saw the amount of depth scoring we got really come to fruition, but if you would have told me before the season, not only would they blow past 260, like just completely leave it in the dust and it wasn't even close, and DeBrincat would have the amount of goal production that he did from January on, December on, I would have called you a crazy person, right? Like that there is, I would not have foreseen that whatsoever. And so I think that's really the biggest thing to me is like when we were having this conversation initially, we were like, oh, like Cat is going to be a huge part of that, obviously. And while he, Brian and I have had this conversation, till we're blue in the face, like he produced in other ways, but just didn't produce in goal scoring. Like objectively, that was something he was not did not produce at the level everyone thought he was going to in. And it's so fascinating that the team took such a big step forward in that department without the goal scorer that they acquired, that everybody was like, oh, he's probably going to lead the team in goals, was like not really nearly as big of a factor in that as we expected.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better myself. Scotty kind of summed up all our thoughts on, Raymond and DeBrincat. Raymond turned into the goal scorer we expected. DeBrincat wasn't the goal scorer we expected. Definitely went through his stretches of hot and cold. I mean, I guess the only thing else I could add is that Larkin yet again proved that he's the heart and the soul of the team. He's at a new career high in goals with 33. Having only played 67 games, 68 games.
68 games, 69 points. Nice.
Nice. The first time in his career, he was over a point per game, too. So it's like, you imagine, we talked about this, if Larkin had been able to play a full 82, which he's not been able to do in any of the last 3 seasons because he's just always taking a cheap shot from somebody, it seems, he would have been a 40 goal scorer this year. Like, I really fervently I believe that he could have touched 40 this season. And it's really disappointing that he missed time. But when he came back, you saw how much of an impact it had. Like, and also, I always want to remind people, like, the team was fighting the flu in March as well when he went out. So people make a big deal about the team's win percentage when Larkin was out, but the flu ravaged the locker room at the same time they lost Larkin as well. So that was a big factor as to why their goal scoring dropped off. But I mean, overall, you're getting Raymond back next season. You're getting Larkin back next season. Hopefully he can play a full 82. DeBrincat will be back next season. That's good for it. We know for sure he's good for at least 25 goals, if not more. You add one more goal scorer to the mix. Like, I don't see any reason why you can't be back to that goal scoring area next season. I mean, obviously you're losing Daniel Sprong. That was 18 goals, but you're getting Jonathan Berggren to hopefully take his place as a bottom 6 scorer. So, I mean, you're still going to have depth options, and I'm assuming you're going to add depth options for scoring, but your big goal scorers are still going to be on the team.
Yeah, if you look at the depth, just talking about it, you've got 5 guys that played a majority of the season, only 5 that were under 10 goals scored. Shane Gostisbehere hit it on the nose with 10. Mo Seider was under by 1. You had Ben Sherratt with 5. You had Christian Fischer with 5. Oli Mata with 4. Jeff Petrie with 3. But everyone else was 10-plus goals. And that just speaks to like like Jake Wallman, 12 goals, Joe Veleno, 12 goals, Michael Rasmussen, 13. Andrew Kopp, I said that if he hit like 12 to 15 goals, that was up from 9 from last season. That's like successful for Andrew Kopp because he's there to play mostly defense. He had 13 goals and 20 assists for 33 points. You had guys chipping in all over the place, and that's kind of what led you to the surge, as well as the big power play boost. The power play boost was a huge one for scoring. For sure. But another factor in that was bringing in Patrick Kane. I mean, I can't understate. We were very skeptical. I think everyone on the face of the planet, if you weren't skeptical about bringing in Patrick Kane initially, you're lying, because no one ever came back from an injury even like he did. Came back and played as well as he had, still says he feels good. Losing Patrick Kane in the offseason would be a big hit. But I think it also frees up. I'm hoping he does Yzerman's smart enough, hopefully, to give him a 3-year contract. Hopefully Patrick Kane is smart enough to take like a $4 million deal, 3 years, $4 million AAV. If not, though, maybe you bring in a guy like Sam Reinhart. Maybe you bring in a Steven Stamkos. Maybe you bring in a guy. You'll have the money to do it. You'll have the space to do it. You've got assets if you need to make a trade. And that's where Yzerman has kind of set this up for something like this to be sustainable going forward.
Yeah.
So
the problem is I genuinely don't think that either Reinhart or Stamkos is leaving. There are comments made by Stamkos and the general manager of the Tampa Bay Lightning recently made it seem like they're going to try and make it work. And then Sam Reinhart, why in the hell would you want to leave, right? You're in a state that has no income tax. You're in Florida, which is beautiful 24/7, and you're on a cup contending team.
Unless there's a hurricane, Brian.
Yes, Brian. Unless there's a hurricane. So I personally
just don't get it, dude.
No, you know what, Scotty, you're on my case today. I'm gonna find a way to lay you off. But the guy I'm wanting, Greg, is I think Jake Gensel's still the guy, right? He fits the age window for a cup window. He's a previous 40 goal scorer. Now, granted, you want to keep in mind that that was with guys like Sidney Crosby, a few years younger at that. But he's a 40 goal scorer. He's in his 20s. He's going to get that big contract, yes, but it's not going to be the 10 plus mil that Reinhardt's going to command. And at the same time, it's not going to be a 34-year-old like Steven Stamkos. So he's that top 6 scoring winger that would kind of fit perfectly. But then, of course, this is why it's a dream scenario, because you're one of 31 teams that are going to be trying to sign Jake Guentzel.
Yeah. But in 17 games played with the Carolina Hurricanes in the regular season, 8 goals and 17 assists for 25 points. So
pretty good.
Away from Sidney Crosby. Now to the Tampa Bay point, though, right now, going into the offseason, they have a roster of 17 players with a cap hit of $75.98 million, leaving them $11.71 million to fill out their roster. Their notable UFAs are Stamkos, Dumba, Duclair, Mott, Watson, Chaff, DeHaan, and Fleury. They have 0 draft. They don't have a draft pick until the 5th round this offseason.
Wild.
That's a cup window.
Sure, great. But Stammer would have to take the world's deepest hometown discount to stay there.
Well, I mean,
and then they would
comments
still
were made
need to sign guys.
I mean, they asked
Could just
about
get
that
hurt at a really convenient time, too.
Yeah.
You didn't think
give
about
him the Mark
that.
Stone. My spleen hurts.
Yeah, I hope they close that loophole in the next CBA. Because that's the thing, like, everyone says the cap circumvention thing is complete tangent. I'll be brief with it. People always say the cap circumvention thing. It's like, it's not cap circumvention because it's legal. It's a loophole, and they're exploiting it. Like, it'll be a cap circumvention if it were illegal, but like, if they don't close it, then it's going to continue to be legal. And they're like, the fact that there's no salary cap in the postseason is wild to me. It's like, because that allows teams to do this. But anyways, end of my tangent.
Yeah, it's less cap circumvention, more dragging out recovery timelines, I think is what it is. The next one was Scotty's. He had over under 4.5 on 50-point players. The Detroit Red Wings ended with 4. They missed by 2 points with JT Compher, missed by 3 points with Patrick Kane and David Perron. We all took the over. Sider only missed by 8. I blame his deployment I put down there. If Sider had more ozone deployment, I think he would have blown past it this season. The dude, and then this will, I guess, be the Sider tangent. The dude's an absolute horse, man. To eat the minutes he eats against the competition that he eats And to play a full season, like played every game of his entire entry-level contract, dude's going to get paid. He deserves all the money in the world. He deserves better deployment. Yzerman said that in his press conference that he wasn't worried about Seider's deployment, but that bringing in guys can give Seider more favorable matchups. They just don't have the current talent on the roster to allow Seider to play more offensive time because of the defensive prowess of the other defensemen. So
it makes sense though. Like he's
it does.
right.
It absolutely, yeah, because we saw it when you see Justin Holl get blown over, or you see Jeff Petrie get blown over, or turnstile Ben Sherratt, that he can get more easier matchups when they start filling in with guys like Albert Johansson, who's an absolute defensive juggernaut, and they start filling in with guys like a Wallander, who's a really kind of versatile defenseman. He'll be able to see easier time, and those point totals should go way up.
Yeah, I think this is the biggest benefit of having a guy like Gostisbehere walk away because of it sucks because Gostisbehere is 56 points this season. He's going to lead the free agent class of defensemen in points. But at the same time, by having him walk away, that means your third pair can now get slightly tougher. Like Olimata is a defensive defenseman, right? Like you would expect to be able to put him within defensive zone starts and put him, against competition that's maybe not just fourth liners, right? But because he was paired with Shane Gostisbehere, in my belief at least, it's just my speculation, they could only put them in the offensive zone. They could only give them the easiest competition because Shane Gostisbehere was a turnstile defensively. And on the special teams aspect, because Shane Gostisbehere existed and he did get 56 points, I'm not going to take that away from him. He did a good job on the power play. That also caused Moritz Seider to not get as much power play time, at least with the top unit, as I believe he should have. Because while he's not Cale Makar and he's not Quinn Hughes, Moritz Seider has a definitive offensive upside. So if Shane Gostisbehere goes away, that may make Seider's life. I'm not trying to blame Seider's deployment entirely on Shane Gostisbehere. I'm not that naive. I'm pretty naive, but not that naive. But I do think that this will give at the very minimum Seider to be the quarterback on the top power play unit where I believe he belongs in the prime of his career because he can drive that power play from up there. I do think he has that ability, and he's shown the ability to walk that blue line and to make deceptively good passes with his those fake shots, and just everything about what he does is just so good. I think that he can be a annual 50-plus point defenseman while being a stalwart in his own end. We just need to get him deployment that's not going to drive him into the ground.
Simon Edvinsson should help that too.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and I think just talking about this, the question as a whole, obviously we all took the over and it was under, but this is more of a testament to the depth again, I think, right? Like you look and yeah, 4 had 50 and we all took the over, but like to your point here, I mean, if you just lower it from 50 to 45, then you have what, 8, 7? You have 7, and then if you make it 40, you have 8. Like that's a much deeper team, I think, maybe than we were even anticipating going into the year. And part of that is obviously we didn't know that we were going to get a point a game player in Patrick Kane in the middle of the season.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest ones is he takes that spot and he absolutely owned it. And again, I'll just be kind of sad if we were kind of, I don't want to say against Patrick Kane, the player coming in. We were just leery about the injury and if he could make it. He's blown that out of the water. So I'll be a little disappointed if he doesn't come back. I think that a lot of his recent comments to the media have been kind of like trained speak where you don't really tip your hand because you're in negotiations. And a lot of people were freaking out. We see like he was saying they and the team and stuff like that. My view on it is that you look at it as a past team. The 2023-24 team is over. So most players should be saying that team or the team because next season it's going to hopefully look different. Well, to your point, Scotty, keeping that depth around to be able to push them forward and then bringing in more depth with your prospect pool.
I both agree and disagree with you, Greg. I agree that it is like him not tipping his hand and him he is very intentional the way he spoke. But I also do think that you look at like David Perron, for instance, again, different circumstance at different points of their career, different market for that player. But Perron who's a pending UFA, did not beat around the bush about his want to return to the Red Wings, right? Like, I'm not ruling out Patrick Kane returning, but I do think that the way he spoke while being intentional, not to tip his hand, also had the intent of saying, I'm not for sure back either. I think and it's his right and he's earned the right. And if he leaves, I'm not going to be mad at him. But I do think that you can read into it a little bit that like, okay, he might be testing the free agent market as opposed to like David Perron, who's like, if I'm testing the free agent market, it's not because I wanted to leave.
Yeah, I'll put my conspiracy theory hat on real quick. Alex DeBrincat in his goodbye message on Instagram was a picture of him and Patrick Kane.
Oh, he's doing the work.
And Alex DeBrincat, when asked about Patrick Kane's exit interview, every question he was asked, he was like chuckling. Like, of course he's coming back. He did like the whole stop asking me these stupid questions thing. I'd love it, but I think that even if he left, there are options out there you could get to not maybe 100% fill that hole because he's Patrick Kane and the stuff he can teach the rookies coming up is absolutely invaluable. But the on-ice production, there are guys out there, I think, that could replace that production but not replace the knowledge that Patrick Kane has gained throughout the years that he could pass on to guys. Like Raymond said, he learned a ton from Patrick Kane. And that's the guy you want Lucas Raymond to be learning how to play forward from, is a dude who's been an Olympian, who's been through the highs and just consistently performs well.
Mm-hmm. You replace him in the aggregate.
We've got Ryan's over-under. He had over-under goals allowed at 260. The Detroit Red Wings finished 9th with 273, 2 less than in 2022-23. I picked the under. I expected less blowouts. I said around 255. Brian had the under. Scotty had the under and touted goaltending. Ryan had the under. We were all wrong. Awesome. But that is only because I will blame Husso injury partially for this. I also thought the defense, even though the defenseman we needed to improve improved, the defensive core as a whole got less defensive. And that, I think, was the major issue, as well as slippage in goaltending for pretty decent stretches.
Yeah, it's wild to me that I touted goaltending in hindsight. That's what a take. But
yeah, you coward.
I didn't run from it like you. I just, again, at least I own when I'm wrong. But it's I do think that that's a great point. I think this was just such a weird year, man. Like there was obviously the total, just like the team's finish was solid and around like in line with what we'll get to next, like around what we thought they were going to do. And but how they got there, like it's like in math class growing up when you had an answer and like you and the kid sitting next to you got the same answer, but you got different work, so you got different like grades on it. Like we just took like the path to get to where we ended was just preposterous, right? Like really hot, really cold, literally on fire, ice cold, like back and forth. And I think it was just again, we talked about it earlier, but the thing that I attribute to this the most is inconsistency, and then again just a complete, just not like failure to understand necessarily, but just totally not like for me personally, just like clearly not grasping the goaltending situation a year ago. Like it's just like I view it in such a different lens after this season, and like again, injuries is not even really a part of that. So yeah, I think, but I really do think that just the inconsistency of the season is really kind of like the biggest thing that jumps out at me with this one.
Yeah, for me, you mentioned the defense, Greg, and you mentioned the defensive core as a whole, but I would extend that too. I think the bigger issue was the defensive effort from the forwards, which felt for the most part pretty non-existent outside of your guys like Dylan Larkin. And you know what? Alex DeBrincat tried defensively far more than I was expecting.
Much more than normal.
Yeah, like he clearly, there was something in his mind where he was like, well, if I'm not going to score, I'm going to try somewhere, elsewhere on the ice, which is great to see. But you look at some of the players that they have. We talked about it earlier in the episode. Scotty mentioned it with guys like Daniel Sprong, Robbie Favre, David Perron, Patrick Kane, Lucas Raymond even isn't great defensively. You have a defensively minded system and a bunch of forwards who don't know how to play defense. And you try to supplement that with guys like Andrew Kopp, Christian Fischer, Michael Rasmussen, who formed like a shutdown line. And they did a good job at that.
JT
in that
Compher
role.
too.
JT Compher as well, but just it's not enough because you look at how a lot of these goals unfold, and there's a lot of reasons these goals happen, but a lot of the time it's like, okay, which forward didn't go into their position? Like there are so many where, and this is why Daniel Sprong got scratched down the stretch.
Getting healthy.
He was just puck watching. You watch guys like who I'm drawing a blank here on David Perron, for instance, who's renowned for his ability to win puck battles, but it's just not fast enough to keep up with the play in the defensive zone and get the puck out of high pressure situations. In the offensive zone, he's great. Like he can get into a spot, he's set up, he's fantastic. But like there's just so many guys on this team who, and yeah, the defensive core was an issue too. With the defensive core got better compared to last season, but it got better as like a whole, not at the top end. It was a bunch of mediocre talent that the Red Wings brought in that didn't really, they say rising tides lifts all boats. Well, that didn't really even happen this year. What happened is your boat, Moritz Seider, ended up having to turn into like a mega yacht, to try and make this thing float. If that analogy makes any sense whatsoever.
It doesn't.
But you get the point I'm trying to get across here. The second and third pairing for the greater part of the season was kind of booty, to put it plainly.
Mo was the Titanic having to dodge the other defensive icebergs.
That's maybe not the best analogy either, comparing Moritz Seider to the Titanic. But I understand. Again, I understand the sentiment. It's just the team. Steve Yzerman said it. The team has got to get better defensively, and that's across the board.
I think he said that was one of the funny parts I took away from the Yzerman presser. They would ask him a completely unrelated question. He's like, well, we have to tighten up defensively. Be like, I asked you about free agent acquisitions. He's like, well, we need to be better defensively. So that was that was the same thing with Newsy. Is like, it's a defense first system. The league scoring is up. And when you can't stop that, in the words of South Park, you're going to have a bad time. That's what's going to happen. So if that effort continues and they get some, I think you look again, this goes back to the offseason coming up. I think you look for a top four defenseman. You go out and you try and make a trade. You try and pick up a guy who can shore up defense. Maybe you get a guy like a Brett Pesce to come in and really solidify the defense of the team. Well, I think there's a situation where you could get rid of a Justin Holl. You let Shane Gostisbehere walk. That's two positions right there. Maybe you buy out a Jeff Petrie. I think that if you don't see at least two guys come off of the defense this offseason, again, like Scotty says, we're going to be freaking out because that is a position that they cannot afford to do nothing in, or else they're going to be sitting in the same position next year wondering why.
I think Justin Holl, and Scotty and I have talked about this, Justin Holl's gone. Like there's from not just a management perspective, but from the player perspective too. Like we traded Clean Costin away at the deadline because he wanted a fresh start. Like, yeah, you can make the argument Justin Holl's not too upset about sitting in the press box making $3 million, but like I don't buy that. I think a player like Justin Holl, who played 80 games the year prior with the Toronto freaking Maple Leafs, who we make all the postseason jokes about the Maple Leafs, but they make the postseason, and he played 80 games and played big minutes. He was their scapegoat. Yes, I know. But like if you're Justin Holl, you're thinking, I'm capable of playing big minutes on a playoff caliber team. Here I am getting healthy scratched. Like he, for his purposes, probably wants out to go to a team that's going to give him the opportunity. I'm speculating. That's just my opinion. I obviously there's no reports that suggest that, but if I put myself in his shoes, that's what I would be thinking. And then from Steve Yzerman's standpoint, you're trying to make changes this offseason to make the team better. And here you have this paperweight of a hockey player who's making $3 million just sitting in the press box. Like that's not helping your team. So you get him out, you clear the cap space. Now, I think you might have to retain 50%. I think you should try and avoid a buyout if possible, because if you have to buy him out, then you're paying half his salary for 4 more
Yeah.
years, where if you trade him, you're paying half his salary for 2 more years. But like, regardless, one way or the other, you got to get rid of him. So one, he can have the opportunity to move on and go to a team that's going to give him the minutes. And then you get out from underneath this albatross of a contract.
Yeah, at the end of the day, and I think this has been said multiple times, hockey players want to play hockey. That's
Right.
like, that's their goal. That's why they do the job. They want to play hockey. Sure, is it nice getting paid $3 million to sit in a box and eat chicken tenders? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, his job is to play hockey, and that's what he wants to do. It's the reason he's in the league. And I agree that a buyout option, I don't think a buyout is an option for Justin Holl. And retaining 50%, any team, there are several teams like the San Jose Sharks,
Right.
like the Habs, can take a defensive player like that to actually probably improve their team from where they're currently at $1.5 million, and he's known to be able to eat 20 plus minutes a night. They'll take a player like that, and you're only going to have to eat that salary for 2 years instead of 4. The only buyout candidate is Jeff Petrie. That is the only buyout candidate on this team,
And that's because he's been retained by half the league.
Yeah. So you can in turn screw over half the league more by buying him out. And then they're also on the hook for extended seasons with a cap hit. So it's like a win-win regardless. And then I think it's easy if you wanted to trade a guy like Olli Maatta. I think that's an easy trade. There's just so many ways they can go. The Yzerman set this up on defense that they could go to offload guys to be able to bring that other talent in.
I actually think, sorry, I was just going to add that I actually think Petrie might end up sticking around in a third pair role just because he's got. Listen. He's got 1 year left on his contract. He's got a partial no trade clause. He wanted to be here. He's been, like you said, retained by multiple teams already. I think he can be, and we saw it, right? Like, given less ridiculously hard deployment when he was paired with Simon Edvinsson, he looked like a competent defenseman. And to your point, like you just said, Olli Maatta is probably the easiest to move because he doesn't have any protection. He's only got 1 more year left on his contract, and he's a competent depth defenseman. And he's easily replaced on this roster by the fact that you have umpteenth number of left side D-man in your own system that are ready to play at the NHL level. So if you can get rid of Hull and you can trade away Maatta, now Petrie becomes your 7th D-man, which is fine for 1 more year. And you can call up an Edvinsson, you can call up an Albert Johansson, you can play both sides of the ice. Like, there you go. Your problem is already solved. I just really find it hard to move Jeff Petrie in the final year of his contract, I think, and to buy him out in his final year would be weird to me because it's just like you eat this 1 year and you're out. Do you really want to extend that pain to another season? I don't know. It's that's where just my head is at personally.
Do you know his dad played for the Tigers?
No way.
Really?
Yeah. His name was Dan or something, I think. But the other option I think for Jeff Petrie is there's also always the possibility that he retires. That's the other option there. But seeing that he played like 77 games, I don't think he's going to do that.
Also, is he going to walk away from $5 million on the table? Because that's what he's making overall.
No, he won't. So the way we're going to end tonight is the way the Red Wings ended the season. My final over-under was 93 points on the season. I think that is what the J Fresh War card had the Red Wings finishing with. I believe was 93 points. Brian, you took the under. You gave us the Boston curse, so thank you for that. You said 90 is reasonable. Brian is the Aviators are out. Nice, Scotty. Brian is the reason that Boston is in the playoffs right now.
Completely agree.
Scotty took the under by a hair, said 91. You now have the title of Scotchstradamus. That is now your new nickname.
Sounds familiar.
Actually, Scotty already has a nickname on Locked On Red Wings. It's called the Oracle.
Okay, so
this is not a new trend. All the way back in the first season with Locked On Red Wings, this began when he correctly predicted an Alex Nedeljkovic shutout all the way to the number of shots saved by Nedeljkovic.
That's absolutely so. Take all your betting advice from Scotty.
Do not.
So on the Grindline podcast, Scotty will be referred to as Scotchstradamus. Ryan took the under at 40 wins. I took the under. I said around 90, but would probably still get us in the playoffs. It was close, guys. And I think you guys had mentioned it. We had mentioned it, that the season as a whole, where we ended up, was a fairly large success. player development wise, team cohesiveness wise, locker room development wise. Even down to, I know there were coaching mistakes at some points. There were some days we were tearing our hair out that they were keeping guys in that they probably shouldn't have kept in, or why are you playing Jeff Petrie? Why are you not bringing up Simon Edvinsson? That sure may have burned us a little bit, but special teams coaching was great for all intents and purposes. And as a whole, to end the season at 91 points and only be taken out of playoffs by what I think is a pretty terrible tiebreaker. I think regulation wins is a bad tiebreaker overall. That this team overachieved what I think we thought they would, given how last season had ended.
I think it's right in line, actually, where Scotty and I believed they would finish. We talked at the beginning of the season, personally, the two of us, that we thought this team would either be the worst team in or the best team out of the playoffs. And that is exactly what happened. They didn't make the playoffs on a tiebreaker. It was a heartbreaking way that it happened, considering the cushion that they had and the way they pissed it away in the month of March. But to not make the playoffs on a tiebreaker, we wanted this team to take a definitive step forward and be one of the last teams out or be one of the final teams in. And they exactly achieved that. They achieved it in the most frustrating way possible. Yes. And I won't take, we talked about this on our own podcast. Like, anybody who wants to call this season a failure because of the fact that expectations do change, especially when you do have an 8-point lead in the wild card as wild card one, and you're only 2 points back of Toronto for third in the Atlantic Division, I won't take that away from anybody. I think I even said it. I think you can say the season is a failure because of the way that it ended, but you can also say that this is a massive success in the long-term outlook of the rebuild. And I think that's where I still sit. Like, it is a failure to not make the playoffs after where they were at. It is.
Sure.
But to take 11 more points?
11 point.
That is a huge jump from last season to this season. And to now be in that playoff conversation, to not just be a fringe team, but to be an actual playoff threat, there's no denying that is a huge success for this rebuild into taking a step forward.
Yeah, this is a just complete lesson of perspective. Is like this whole conversation, right? Like, if you are talking about the window from the new year to the end of the year, from February to the end of the year, it is absolutely an objective failure that they did not make the playoffs. That it is wild that they collapsed as hard as they did. But if you're talking about this season as a whole, start to finish, what our expectations were in August, it's a success. If you even zoom out even more and you just go big picture, this entire rebuild, the Iser plan, quote unquote, this entire thing, this was another double-digit point increase from last year to this year, and you were tied with a team that made the playoffs. Like, you were right there, right? So this is all just from where your starting point is. This is all just perspective and like what lens you're looking at the season through. If you're doing, big picture or start of the season, absolutely. And going into next year, I still think for as crappy as March was, like, you still are taking momentum into this fall. You're still taking in a mindset of like time to take the next step forward into this fall. And I think it's really hard to argue that the season as a whole was not a success, despite how awful March was, obviously, and how you somehow missed the playoffs despite the lead that Brian articulated there. So yeah, I think again, we've all had this conversation a few times, but I think the season as a whole, if you have to label it success or failure, it is a success. It just was a failure from February on. And yeah, who's a coward now, Brian? I got the points exactly right.
It's the difference between calling the season a failure and saying you didn't make the playoffs. That's a failure.
Sure.
The season was not. The season was a success. The guys, like, even if you looked at it by just like, and we'll talk about him every episode until next season starts, Lucas Raymond, like, that's a success. Like, that's a massive
Big
success.
time.
He helped your team have success. It's
The
just go ahead.
I was just going to say the reality of it is that people want to put things in nice, clean categories. It's a very human
Black and white
nature.
boxes.
But like the world's not black and white. This season wasn't black and white. It both can be true where they failed down the stretch, but they succeeded in the overall goal of taking that big step forward. And that's just what it is.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Guys, I want to wrap it up by giving you a little bit of time to just shout out your socials, what you got going on. Go ahead.
Yeah, follow me on social media, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at Brian Fisher, LORW. You can follow Locked On Red Wings at LO_Red Wings. Scotty, what you got, buddy?
What's my at, dude? Bentley Scotty? Is that right?
Yes, it is your last name.
Correct.
Last name, first name, Scotty. How do you not know this?
Okay, yeah, Bentley Scotty is my Twitter X account, and then I also do Locked On Tigers, so you can check that out. And then I also write for the news, so if you're interested in I cover sports for them. So it's pretty much my life is these the beautiful game. So,
and they are much braver than us. They record every day. As to where I think next season we might move to twice a week, little shorter episodes twice a week, but they do every day, which has to be fantastic, right, guys?
It is until it isn't. It was fantastic in January and February, but in March it became miserable.
And the summer is an adventure.
Yeah,
yes,
you get a lot of really fun topics. I'm sure we'll do a little bit more collaboration in the summer when there's absolutely nothing to talk about, so we can do what me and Scotty were talking about when Brian's computer died. Awesome Ken Holland trades. And,
we're waiting for Brian to join the Zoom, and for like 8 minutes just talking about bad Ken Holland trades.
David Legwand and
there's so many.
Like that.
It was a fun game. There was so many.
Let's not forget trading a first for Kyle Quincy and what that first then became.
Yes.
Please, after the show, tweet that at Ryan. Kyle Quincy was his favorite player ever, and he gets really happy when you talk about him. It's great stuff.
Love it.
For some reason, I'm doubting that is how he truly feels, but maybe I'll do that. But you commended us for the 5 episodes a week, but I tell you what, it's not going to be 5 episodes a week, and because I cannot keep doing this on my iPhone, so I'll have to figure this out. I'm not joking. So like the laptop is kind of working right now. So I'm going to, as soon as we get done on recording, I'm going to head to Walmart and get like one of those USB adapters that have all the different ports. And I'm going to see if I can get this episode up, because I can't even get this episode up with just my iPhone. So, this is going to be an adventure.
Brian's going to Frankenstein it. You can follow me online at Bringing the Wing. You can follow Grindline Podcast online at Grindline Pod. I want to thank you guys very much for coming on and doing this recap. Like I said, anytime we want to do stuff in the summer, you just let me know. It's fun to get together and just talk about hockey. We'd like to thank the Hockey Podcast Network for hosting us and spreading us around. Vintage Detroit, which is the only place you get your Detroit jerseys from and worked on. We have a exclusive t-shirt line with Vintage Detroit right now, so go check that out if you go to their website. And I think there's a Keep It Local button. We are on there. We have 4 shirts up right now. There will be more coming over the summer, and I think they're pretty cool. But that's going to do it for us tonight. So for Scotty and Brian, thank you for coming on. I am Greg. You stay classy, Hockey Town.
That's going to do it for this crossover episode between Locked On Red Wings and the Grindline Podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed. I know it was a long one for you. I know you usually get about 30 minutes, but we went the full Grindline length of it, about an hour, a little over an hour maybe. And it was fun. So expect more of that in the summer as well. We like those guys. They're fun to talk with. And again, hope you enjoyed. We'll be back on Monday recapping 2 Grand Rapids Griffins games. Hopefully the series will be wrapped up in the Griffins' favor by then. And we'll also wrap up the final 4 players for the postseason player evaluations. Stay tuned. We ball.